Welcome back to Q and Assault Saturday, Week 10 Fantasy Football, answering as many questions as humanly possible for y'all. As always, Underdog's got an absolutely free bet for you on their platform, okay? If you've never been on Underdog Fantasy, you're going to go download the app. The first link is in the description right now, and it's going to take you to the App Store. You're going to download it. You're going to use code BDGE when you deposit $10 or more, and when you do that, they're going to hit you with a deposit match. They're going to give you this free square of CJ Stroud, half a passing yard. Life is good. Free bets, free money, free everything, all right? Code BDGE on Underdog Fantasy. Now, y'all know how this works. Y'all know how it works. It is Week 10, and Q and Assault, I let y'all assault me with any sit-start questions that you might have, and these are the most frequently asked players as it relates to sit-start questions for the week. I redesigned the chart for y'all to make it a little bit more easily digestible, and I ranked the 8 most asked about players, which were Khalil, Shakir, Josh Downs, Jaylen Waddle, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Legette, Calvin Ridley, and DJ Moore. Now, kind of broke these up into tiers. The top 3 are a tier by themselves. Then you have MHA, BTJ, the abbreviated rookies, and then you have Xavier Legette, Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore at the bottom. Now, we've included a few other new little metrics on the chart for y'all as I go and break down each one of y'all. So hopefully this answers a bunch of the sit-start questions that you guys may or may not have for the week. Now, with these, we have the Vegas fantasy point projection there in that second column, all right? So that gives you what Vegas has them totaled in at fantasy points. Underdog, these types of sports books allow you to bet on fantasy points, which gives you a pretty accurate zoom in of where they see each of these players. And again, half-point PPR. You'll see Jaylen Waddle is not filled out because we have Tyreek Hill on the mend. We don't know whether or not he's going to play, which I'm sure is going to be a frequently asked question in today's live stream. And then the last column there is opponents' fantasy points per game allowed to that position. So, for instance, on that first row, we have Khalil Shakir at Indianapolis. Indianapolis is allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game. To make it simple for y'all, green means it is good for that player. Red means it is bad for that player. All right. That is how conditional formatting works. So let's start at the top. We have Khalil Shakir. We have Keon Coleman out. We have Amari Cooper likely questionable if he does end up playing, but we have a really good matchup. We have Shakir, who's been absolutely fucking balling. This is a 46.5 point over-under. Khalil Shakir has been the most consistent part of that offense, probably outside of James Cook, and I would say that it's honestly almost on par with it. Because James Cook's been a little boomer bust. Like when he booms, he goes boom boom. He's a top 5 running back, but when he busts, he's usually outside the top 24. Regardless, we're not talking about James Cook here. We're talking about Khalil Shakir, who's been just a dominant slot wide receiver, pretty much week in and week out. So love the matchup, love the game script, love everything about Khalil Shakir this week. He's an easy top 20 fantasy wide receiver for me. And as you can see, Vegas actually has him projected as the top scoring fantasy wide receiver of these 8 players above Josh Downs. Now, Josh Downs was a dude that I ranked very highly last week, and that was a mistake given the matchup. Like, I knew Joe Flacco was going to struggle against Minnesota. That I felt like was pretty predictable from about a mile away. I'm going back to the well with Josh Downs for a few reasons. One, we have Michael Pittman Jr. out for this one. Obviously condenses the target share. I don't even think Adonai Mitchell is a bad pickup here in play. I would not go towards Alec Pierce, and let me tell you why. And this is one of the reasons I like Josh Downs a lot more this week than I probably did last week. Buffalo plays too high. 2 safeties back at the 4th highest rate in the NFL, 56.3%. They play man coverage at the 5th lowest rate. Now, Josh Downs has the 4th highest target per route rate versus zone coverage in the NFL. That's the type of coverage where they don't let you beat them deep, right? That is pretty much why Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle struggled last week to get any real production. That is why Miami gets shut down versus Buffalo, because they take away any of the deep shots that you take, which makes Alec Pierce a shitty play. It makes Josh Downs a really good play. You see a lot of, targets getting sprinkled and peppered over the middle of the field, which is why OBJ got targeted. Johnny Smith got targeted. Tyreek Hill was picking up, 15, 17 chunk plays at a time, and it takes away a dude like Jaylen Waddle's type of speed. So that's why I really like Josh Downs in this matchup in particular, because of the way that the Buffalo Bills play their defense. So despite what Josh Downs may or may not have done for you last week, honestly, it wasn't even that bad of a day. He went 6 for 60, so enough, fucking out here getting privilege and shit. People want to talk about politics. Yeah, it is, right? Check, 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 check. I hope so. I haven't even looked at the comments yet. I hope everybody's chilling right now, though. So let's keep on moving down here. We have Jaylen Waddle, who I was just talking about. Now, with Tyreek Hill, yeah, it does seem a little bit concerning. The wrist injury kind of flared up out of nowhere, and the problem is that they play on Monday night, so you're going to have to make a decision. Regardless, I think Jaylen Waddle is actually a good start, whether or not Tyreek Hill is playing. If I had to guess, this is like one of the bounce-back games for Jaylen Waddle. Another defense where I think Jaylen Waddle's type of receiver can take advantage. This is a 49-point over-under. I think the Rams offense, who have been clicking on all cylinders, are going to be able to put up points. Miami's going to have to put up points. It's in a good environment out in LA, which is, good for Tua because he needs that type of environment. The Rams have allowed the 8th most fantasy points per game. This is a game to have Jaylen Waddle back in your lineup. So he's in that top tier. Now, as we move to the second tier, it gets a little more dicey. Like, you don't want to say it about Marvin Harrison Jr., but MHJ going against the Jets defense. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr. has seen more than 8 targets just one time this year. It was back in week 3. So the exciting part about MHJ in this landing spot, right? Like top 5 capital, you just assume he was walking into 140, 150 targets. You need to see 8+ targets a game in order to get there. He has seen that one time. Like when we talk about the other receivers on this list, like Josh Downs has seen more than 8 targets in 5 of the 7 games that he's played this year. And then you think about the matchup for Marvin Harrison Jr. against New York. The over-under is really moving up, right? It's at 46.5, which feels like the highest the Jets have probably had maybe all year. Hate the matchup. They allow the single fewest fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. I think it's twofold. One, they have an elite secondary. They have Sauce Gardner, and they have DJ Reed, who's playing out of his mind. And they're at full strength right now. They've been missing a lot of their secondary pieces week in and week out. Michael Carter, the slot cornerback, is back. Ashton Davis and Tony Adams, both of them got full practices in, so both their safeties are back as well. Very tough secondary matchup this week for Arizona's passing game, which, again, has looked clunky. We don't see consistent targets for MHJ. And I think that, like, you put MHJ in above the other guys below him because the other ones have such questionable quarterback play, but you still don't feel good about MHJ. So, like, that first tier for me is rock solid wide receiver 2s. This tier is where you get like shaky flex starts. This is where you get shaky players that you feel a little bit uncomfortable putting into your lineup. And as you can see, Vegas has Marvin Harrison Jr.'s over under at 8.95 fantasy points in half PPR. The other thing about the Jets defense is they're a run funnel defense, right? Like they are a team that allows a shitload of points to running backs. They can't tackle. They allow gaping holes up the middle. So opposing teams run the ball against them very effectively. And Arizona, that's what they do well. Give the ball to James Conner. Give the ball to Trey Benson. Amari DiMarcado gets in there. That's what they want to do in this offense. And it's worked really well. So it lines up with what they want to do against New York, which usually drains clock and makes me a little bit nervous. So I got MHJ at 4. I don't feel great about him. But it's hard to feel great about Brian Thomas Jr. playing against Minnesota. Now, Minnesota's a good pass defense, but as you can see, they allow a shitload of fantasy points to the wide receiver position, second most in the NFL, mostly because they score a lot of points. Obviously, the elephant in the room here is Mr. Trevor Lawrence is going to be out for this game. Mac Jones is going to be the starting cornerback. I also think BTJ is probably less than 100%. He did have his worst fantasy game of the year in week 9, so I don't want to overemphasize it, although, like, without putting context behind a new quarterback, yeah, it's going to be a little bit problematic. And one of the reasons that I'm nervous about the Jacksonville wide receivers going forward is Trevor Lawrence. Like, sure, you might say like Mac Jones is an extremely usable backup quarterback. You know, Mac Jones was a first-round pick. We've seen him have success at the NFL level. All that is true, and I'd much rather have Mac Jones in at quarterback than, fucking Tyler Huntley or one of those bums. But Trevor Lawrence, what he brought to this team, maybe he wasn't the most efficient real-life NFL QB, but he was currently 3rd in deep throw rate. So 15.3% of his throws were deep downfield, 3rd in the NFL. He was 4th in completion rate on deep throws. He was top 5 in pretty much every deep throw category statistic for quarterbacks. And Brian Thomas Jr. benefited a lot from that. Among 100-plus qualified wide receivers, he ranks 8th in target quality rating, which factors in both depth and like where on the field those targets come from. 8th among 100-plus qualified receivers, 14th in catchable target rates, right? So that is where I get nervous. Like, BTJ is a beast, but he's also experienced a lot of luck just in terms of the accuracy of the targets coming his way. Without T-Law, this obviously makes me nervous. Now, there might be a lot of garbage time in this one, which makes me feel a little bit better about him. It's usually the case for teams playing against Minnesota. So, what was I saying? They've allowed, prior to Baltimore letting up all those points to Jamar Chase, they've allowed the most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. So, like, with Jacksonville's secondary being the way it is and how bad it is, I'd imagine Minnesota's just going to have their way with them. So it's going to end up leading to more volume in the passing game for Jacksonville, which is why BTJ, despite having a backup quarterback, still lands in this tier below the bottom tier, which is where we'll get to right now. And that is Xavier Legette tops this. Now, if you look at the Vegas fantasy point projection row or column, I always get confused. I always got to do it in my head before I say the word row or column. Row is horizontal, column. If you look at the column, there's a bright red spot, and it is Xavier Legette. They have him at 7.15 half PPR fantasy points. This game's obviously played in Germany. Most of those international games, especially with inexperienced teams, end up being really sloppy. Here's what I'll say about Legette, though. I actually don't hate him. I'm going to have to start him in the league where I have T. Higgins out and I have Josh Jacobs on a bye. Like, I'm a little bit desperate at flex. I'm starting Legette, and I don't hate it because the guy scores a lot of touchdowns. They obviously don't have Deontay Johnson anymore. Adam Thielen is not playing. Jonathan Mingo is out of the picture. They're going to have to throw the ball. They're 6.5-point dogs against New York. I also, it's not really analysis, but I can't. Have any of you guys seen the meme or the video online with, it's Scotty Barnes, NBA player, talking to Giannis, and Giannis already speaks kind of broken English, and Scotty Barnes, who is completely American, just speaks ridiculously broken English. I don't want to be mean, but it sounds very uneducated. And they were saying imagine being Giannis and English being your second language and having to listen to this Scotty Barnes clip because they played a clip of Scotty Barnes talking to him, and you couldn't understand a fucking word he was saying. I'm imagining Xavier Legette having a good game and then being interviewed after the game and people in Germany, Germans, trying to understand what Xavier Legette is saying. And I can't get that thought out of my mind, and how fucking funny that must be. I want that to happen, and then I want to go around the streets of Germany asking people to react to what Xavier Legette just said. So that's a little bit more wishful thinking. But in that same note, I do like Legette. He's been very involved in the offense, and I think if you look at all the moves that they're making, they're clearly investing into this kid. They're we're getting rid of all these other young pieces. We're getting rid of Deontay Johnson. We're getting rid of Jonathan Mingo. We're going to build our core around this kid and then kind of see what happens in the future. Over the last 2 weeks since Bryce Young has taken over as a starter, he leads the team with a 24% first read share. Last week, that was all the way up at 31.6%, just the first read target share. So they're getting him involved downfield. They're getting him involved by the line of scrimmage with screens. There's no one in the Giants secondary that scares me away from a dude like Legette. He's always again, I've said this many times this week already, but he's been a few inches away from huge games and just huge plays. And hopefully he can break right here in Germany for you. So I think you could do worse than Legette because all of the target competition is kind of out of the way here. Moving down, Calvin Ridley. You want to talk about fucking target competition? We don't have any out here in Tennessee. However, Will Levis is starting, and Calvin Ridley has put up some of the woke games with Will Levis under center. They have an extremely tough matchup in LA against the Chargers. They've allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to the receiver position. This game is projected to be a 39-point total. It is disgusting out there. So, despite Ridley playing really well recently, I don't think I'm going to ride that hot streak. I understand if you want to play Ridley over Legette because it feels a lot safer. I got really no problem with it, but I think I personally wouldn't do so. As you'll see a theme here, the game total, it goes from green down to red, and that's not sorted by my rank. That's sorted by It just so happens that I want to put pieces in my lineup that are in high scoring games, and that's a lot of the way to like simplify fantasy football is you want players attached to games where you think there could be shootout potential, right? That's what happens when you start putting players in your lineup that were in the Cincinnati-Baltimore game. And that's a good lesson to exponentiate over the course of the season. Like when you're drafting players in the preseason, of course, you're not going to be able to accurately predict every team that's going to be really good or every team that's going to be really bad. Like in the beginning of the year, it would have been easy to fade Washington and say, hey, I don't really want players on my team that are attached to the Washington offense. But for the most part, I think you have a pretty good idea of like which teams are going to score a lot of points and which teams have good offenses. And the more you attach players like that to your fantasy team, the better it's usually going to end up working out. Like when you end up looking at the top 15 fantasy running backs or wide receivers or tight ends at the end of the year, more often than not, like 70% of the time, those guys are made up of players on good teams, players that are on teams that are like top 10 in scoring on the year. So, there's never a perfect science, but you keep attaching yourselves to the right side of an outcome, or you keep like taking the edge there in the percentage games, and you end up with a good team here. So as you can see, again, like the bad players are in games that aren't projected to score a lot of points, which is why I have DJ Moore all the way on the bottom. Chicago plays against the Patriots. Now, that's a 38.5 point total game. DJ Moore has a Vegas projection of 9 fantasy points. Everything about this offense is gross, man. The vibes in Chicago are atrocious. The locker room is lost. I'll lay out a couple positives and a couple negatives. Like DJ Moore to me is still the wide receiver one in terms of usage, in terms of like first read share, in terms of just being on the field, right? Like he has not had a game with under 20% of a target share. He's running 100% of the routes. That being said, the offense is so uncreative. It is so stagnant. It is so ugly most of the time. And Caleb Williams is not helping that, right? Like it's not, he is making some plays out of nothing, but sometimes he's making secondary plays out of something that was already there. He's scrambling too much. He's holding the ball for too long. He's also missing some really easy throws, which felt like that's uncharacteristic, but it's happening more and more again. So this offense just feels very, very broken. And when I look at DJ Moore, his target quality rating, his target accuracy rating, his catchable target rate are all outside of the top 70 wide receivers. And I tweeted this out, so if you're not following me, you can go follow me on Twitter at Nick Ercolano. On average, the wide receivers in Chicago finish as the PPR weekly wide receiver 1 is the wide receiver 29. So basically, I took the 6 games where DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze have played together. And I said on average, when those games happened, the wide receiver 1 finished as what in PPR? So the wide receiver 1 in those games finished as the wide receiver 29. The wide receiver 2 finished as the wide receiver 58. The wide receiver 3 finished as the wide receiver 71. Okay? In 3 out of those 6 games, all 3 of them finished outside of the top 40. So one, it's like the best one of these guys on average finishes as the 29th best wide receiver. So it's not like you're getting a boom week every week. Like, of course, there have been some good weeks from them. Like Keenan Allen had a big week. DJ Moore's had 1 or 2 good weeks. Rome Odunze's had a week or 2. But on average, you're getting a borderline wide receiver 3. And then underneath them, if your guy, the one that you're starting, is not the one that's the wide receiver 1, he's probably finishing outside the top 40 or 50. So everything in Chicago feels gross. The New England game feels like it could be a 17-10 game. If he gets the Christian Gonzalez shadow, like that's another problem there. So I don't know, dude. It's kind of gross. So I got DJ Moore down there. Like obviously you could start him if you need to, but I have no interest in starting any Chicago Bears wide receiver. All right, so those are the top 8 sit-start questions I feel like I got over and over again. Basically, what I do is pop that into Discord. So if you're a Big Dog member, right, that's how you actually get into this live stream in real time, which I'll jump into the questions now. If you're a Big Dog member, you can become a Big Dog member by one of 2 ways, either going to bdge.co and signing up for the Big Dog membership, or by going to Underdog Fantasy, the app, and downloading using code BDGE when you deposit $10 or more. And again, you'll get that free square that I showed earlier in the video. You will get access to the Big Dog membership for the entirety of the year going forward. All right. Let's get into some sit starts. Full PPR, pick 2, Marvin Harrison Jr., Amari Cooper, D-Hop, or Collins. So for me, this is a clear D-Hop and Collins, assuming Collins plays, and it is trending towards him playing. D-Hop, I think, is probably going to be in my lineup week in and week out going forward. If I had to pivot away from Nico, I think I'm probably going to lean with Amari Cooper if he is playing, but we also don't know if that's happening, but it is leaning towards that way. And I think Collins is probably going to play. So I go D-Hop, Collins, Cooper in that order. 2 separate questions from Mr. Steven Franco. How you doing? We got full PPR, Mostert or Ray Davis and Javonte Williams or Jordan Mason. Mostert over Ray. And then would obviously depend on C-Mac. If C-Mac doesn't play, we go Jordan. If C-Mac does play, which I do expect happening, I would go Javonte. What's up, Big Greg? I'm old Greg. Half PPR pick 2, Ramondre Stevenson, Rashad White, Rico Dowdle. Yeah, I mean, my first impression would definitely lean towards Ramondre Stevenson. The Chicago Bears run defense is actually super bad. And then I like the involvement of Rashad White over the last few weeks, especially with these wide receivers down. So I think I'd probably sit Rico Dowdle without Dak under center there, despite him having a relatively predictable workload. He's probably going to be the one I sit. Mikey Baby, I traded Saquon for Gibbs and Marv, PPR. Dub also start 2, Monty, Tracy, BTJ, full PPR. So we'll go backwards there. I'm definitely going to start the 2 running backs, Tracy and Monty. Love both of them this week. Trade Saquon for Gibbs and Marv. I would have taken the Saquon side. Yeah, I think you gave up the 101. I don't think it's a terrible trade, assuming you needed a wide receiver. Like Gibbs is obviously a great player, and he'll be, good down the stretch. But I don't feel like Marv is enough to move the needle here because at this point, realistically, he's just been like a boomer bust wide receiver 3. So didn't move the needle enough for me to go from Gibbs to Saquon. But overall, I don't think it's it's not like a team ruining trade. We have Kyler versus the Jets or Daniel Jones at Carolina, 6 point per passing touchdown. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to go with Daniel Jones. He actually had a great fantasy day last week. This defense doesn't get any worse than Carolina. So I can't believe I'm telling you this, but yeah, I'm probably going to go DJ. Eli, Quentin Johnston, Jameson Williams, or Hunter Henry in the flex full PPR. So QJ would actually probably be my 3 there. Again, low total. I think a lot of his production has been kind of more lucky than anything else. You got JMO, the Lions, playing against the Texans, who have honestly not been that great of a secondary or defense overall, which we thought was going to happen. You got Henry against Chicago. Chicago is obviously a great pass defense, and I think they're getting back to full health. So I'm going to lean Jameson Williams there. Kyler or Purdy, that's definitely Purdy for me. Niner, with them being so close, who would you start? Brian Thomas Jr. versus Minnesota or Xavier Legette? Yeah, I mean, I just, that was on the chart there, so. Full PPR, BTJ or Bucky. Okay, that gets a little bit interesting. We got Bucky going against the 49ers. I think because I'm so uneasy about the BTJ situation, I lean Bucky, who I feel like I know is in a good situation and a good player at this point. Alex, full PPR, trade Higgins or Pickens for Pollard or David Montgomery would be used in the flex spot. Yes. So this question is near and dear to my heart because in the Your Idiot League Mates, I have both Higgins and Pickens. And I think if either of those running backs landed in my inbox, I would take either of those trade offers. The one I would maybe consider is maybe keeping Higgins for Pollard. Like at this point, if you have Higgins, obviously he's the coniest of all cones. But unfortunately, you've eaten all the injury weeks. Like they didn't put him on IR. He's missed 3 games. So realistically, he should be back next week, and then he'll probably be back to being good again. So I could understand if you wanted to keep Higgins based on the fact that like he should, in theory be healthy for the rest of the year for you. But you also did miss, like, this is the really fucking annoying part about owning T. Higgins is because he's been so fucking good when he's on the field, these last couple weeks have hurt the most because the matchups were so good. Baltimore and Vegas, and Joe Burrow threw for like 10 touchdowns in those two matchups. And you've got to think that Higgins would have scored 1, 2, 3 times during that 2-week span, which hurts a lot. So you miss some of the good weeks. But again, like I think you probably get the healthy Higgins going forward, so you'd give that up. But I would give up Pickens for either of those backs. And then for me, I probably still lean both running backs over Higgins. But yeah, I could understand if in full PPR you want to go Higgins a little bit more there. Greggy Baby, half PPR, super flex contending team. By contending, is this a dynasty question then? Mahomes, Nico, Zach Moss, or okay, yeah, you're definitely not asking about Zach Moss unless it's dynasty, or Herbert, Ladd, and Breece Hall. Whoa. Okay, you're a contender. Mahomes, Nico, Zach, Herbert, Ladd, Breece. Oof. I don't know that I lean one way or the other. I think if I had, gun to head, I think I would take the Herbert, Ladd, Breece side. The reason being, Moss is obviously a 0 in this trade. Nico, while he's, a prime dynasty target, he's a little bit older than you'd like to see, right? Like he came in a little bit older, took him a few years to break out. So Breece Hall is actually like 3 years younger than Nico, I want to say. Ladd's obviously way younger than Nico. Herbert, the thing I like about the Chargers offense is like we're seeing it be successful right now. This is year one, and they haven't even invested in like offensive pieces at all. So I imagine next year when they go out and sign a free agent, T. Higgins or something, next year when they draft a first-round wide receiver, like that offense should probably be, humming on all fucking cylinders. So that's an offense I kind of want to attach myself to. So I think I'd be very okay leaning towards the bottom part of that trade. Mike said, sorry, okay, dub then. Yeah, for sure. Full PPR, start Rome or add Legette. Yeah, I know there's been a lot of hype about Rome, but here's the thing. He's still running like the third most routes behind Keenan and DJ Moore, and he's so inconsistent. Like he really is not having predictable breakout weeks whatsoever. So I'm actually going to lean Legette there. I had Gibbs and Marv, move them for Saquon. The rest of running backs are Breece, Tracy Monty. You got a running back room, Saquon, Breece, Tracy Monty. That's insane. Wide receivers, Cup, Debo, BTJ, JSN. Yeah, you're kind of fucking him, Mike. Your team is kind of him, Steen. That's fucking baller. I wish my team resembled that in any fucking sense of the imagination. My dynasty teams do kind of look like that. I got a running back room with like Bijan, JT, Chase Brown, Kareem Hunt, Tyrone Tracy. It's like crazy. I'm having to sit like a top 12 back every single week. And the wide receivers, I've like Chris Godwin got hurt, DK got hurt, but I got Jaden Reed. It's a good squad. It's nice when you fucking build up a dynasty team the right way. Just sold Mooney for DK. Was it a dub? Yeah, I don't even have to read the next part of that. That's fucking insane. That's a huge dub. DK was like unstoppable. I know actually Mooney up to this point has actually outscored him, and their schedule going forward is fantastic. So maybe it's not as far-fetched as my reaction is, and I think most people would side with because of how good Mooney has been in this Atlanta offense. And our schedule, honestly, is fucking phenomenal going forward. But Seattle being in that division, I mean, they get to play the Rams, they get to play the Cardinals, they get to play the Niners. Like, those are all good matchups as well. So, definitely DK for me there. Is Michael Wilson droppable? Yeah, for sure. Dang, I got in late half PPR, one flex. Mostert, McMillan, Pop Douglas, Bucky. I'm gonna go Bucky there. Mostert makes me a little bit nervous because of the fumble and the benching last week. McMillan's like clearly extremely limited if he even does play. And Pop Douglas has been unfortunately really inconsistent. And then they get a really tough matchup against Chicago. So that's tough. Yeah, it was a keeper redraft league. Okay. I kept Breece for a third. Nice. Had Gibbs for the 110, Mar for the 201. Traded them for Saquon. Yeah, it's a dub. It's a dub, a show. How you doing? All right. Well, we're at the 30-minute mark, and the questions kind of came to a halt here. So I will sign off at that. And again, if you guys are new here and want to be involved in the live chat, in the actual live stream as it happens every Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, become a Big Dog member, bdge.co, or the cheapest, least expensive way to do so is through Underdog Fantasy. Go download the Underdog Fantasy app, promo code BDGE when you deposit just $10, and you'll get a Big Dog membership for the rest of the regular season. All right, I love y'all. Smoochies, good luck in week 10. Let's go get a couple dubs. Let's go lock up some playoff positions. Let's go get some hardware. Let's go download some fucking software. Let's do it all. All right, love y'all. Smoochies. Need to drop one as a Nico is coming off of IR. Do I drop DJ or Keaton Mitchell? Is that DJ Moore? I would drop Keaton over DJ.